All right, so maybe let's kick off. Let's get started. So welcome so much, everybody. Great to have you all with us. My name is Nick Franklin. I'm the president of Hell's Kitchen Democrats. This is a joint Hell's Kitchen Democrats Chelsea Reform Democratic Club forum. So I also want to recognize the leadership of both clubs. We've got Paul Devlin, district leader from HK Dems. Give us a wave, Paul. We've got Sylvia Di Pietro and Stephen Scarles-Mulligan, district leaders from CRDC. Thank you so much for coming. And we've got my counterpart on the CRDC side, Mindy Rosier Rayburn. Give me a nod if I got your name right, Mindy. Yeah, I got a thumbs up. All right, great. So thank you everybody for coming. We are progressive democratic clubs on the west side of Midtown in Manhattan. We're excited to hear tonight from the candidates for Comptroller for New York City for 2021. We have got Council Member Brad Lander, Senator Brian Benjamin, Assemblymember David Weprin, and Senator Kevin Parker with us tonight. So give us a wave, candidates. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us. And we're really glad that, you're taking the time to come and explain your positions to our members and have a chat with them. We're really looking forward to hearing from you, hearing all about what you think is important and making informed decisions about who we support in 2021. So the way we're going to run this tonight, we're going to give you all 4-minute introductions and local activist and Hell's Kitchen Democrats MVP Paulette Osborne is going to be our timekeeper for tonight. Thank you so much, Paulette, for volunteering.
My pleasure.
So Paulette's going to give you, in your 4 minutes, Paulette's going to give you a 30-second warning towards the end. So please forgive her if she steps in and interrupts your flow. That's just so you know when you have 30 seconds to go. Paulette.
I was going to say 1 minute on the 4-minute introduction, and then everything else is 30 seconds. Is that okay?
That sounds even better. Perfect.
Okay.
Great. So thank you so much. So we're going to do 4-minute introductions. And then I'm going to hand over to Paul Devlin, our district leader, who's going to introduce some conversations. And we're going to have each of the candidates talk on a particular topic in a round robin format. We're going to spend most of our time in those conversations talking about the issues that matter that we've had from our members. And then we're going to have an opportunity for live questions from the forum. And we're going to post a Google form in the chat. I'm going to do that in a second. So while you're listening to the candidates, if questions come up, please use this form to submit your questions. So I'm going to post this in the chat right here, my.hkdems.org/questions. So everybody, while you're listening to the candidates, if questions come to you, please use that form to submit questions, and Paul's going to put those to the candidates. And then finally, we've got a 90-second closing at the end. Make sense? All right, so without any further ado, I want to introduce the candidates alphabetically by first name. So Council Member Brad Lander, you're up first. Please give us an intro to yourself and your campaign.
Thank you so much, Nick, and to Mindy and Paul and Sylvia and Stephen and all of the Hell's Kitchen Dems and Chelsea Reform Democratic Club board members for this invitation to speak. You know, you've got to love local democracy a lot to come to yet one more Zoom, especially about the controller's race. So I really am grateful for it. I really appreciate it. And it's really wonderful to see some friends here like Kate, who I've had the good fortune to work with many times in the past. I want to start by saying a big thank you for everyone on this call who organized to help Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win. Our local political institutions played a big role in winning that race, and everyone who cares about democracy owes gratitude to everybody who showed up. I share your passion for building a strong Democratic Party that's rooted in those principles of racial, social, economic justice, and building a more progressive and a more livable New York City. And that's why I'm excited to share my vision for the Comptroller's office in these hard and important years ahead. The perspective I bring is informed by my background in community planning and development at the Fifth Avenue Committee in Brooklyn, where I fought for tenants' rights, to restore our commercial strips and our small businesses and preserve and build affordable housing, as well as at the Pratt Center for Community Development, where I worked with communities around the city on issues of economic, environmental justice, and community planning. In my 10 years in the city council, I've led some big fights, winning a fair work week for fast food workers, a groundbreaking living wage for Uber and Lyft drivers, and the Freelance Isn't Free Act to protect freelancers from wage theft, helped create some of the strongest protections against tenant harassment in the country, actually borrowed from some work that you guys had done in Hell's Kitchen to bring a certificate of no harassment citywide, to hold reckless drivers accountable, to bring participatory budgeting to New York City, and to strengthen our campaign finance laws, and finally to bring ranked choice voting to New York City, which I'm excited this is going to be the first election for. In all of that work, I've fought to make government work better, both by working closely with community leaders like those on this call and in these clubs, and by taking a good hard look at the data to make government work better and more consistently with our values. Long before the COVID crisis, we were already in a time of peril for our democracy, with gaping inequality, failures of truth-telling, and short-sighted politics, leaving us unprepared for crises. So now we face the greatest challenge of our generation. Obviously, until vaccines are widely available, we have to do more to manage the public health crisis. And then beyond the pandemic, we face the challenge of securing a just and durable recovery for all New Yorkers. And that means those people who are waiting in long lines for food. That means saving
1 minute.
mom and pops, which is why I'm fighting for a small business recovery lease program, and then facing up to the budget crisis the city faces, but not with austerity politics, but with a smart Keynesian approach to long-term rebuilding. That's what I've worked for in the council, and I know we can do it now with investments in clean energy, sustainable urban innovation, public health, and the arts to create hundreds of thousands of good green jobs and bring our city back to life. But all of that requires that we make government work better, because government can't deliver on any of its promises when city agencies are run poorly, when money is wasted, when results aren't clear, when projects aren't completed on time, when there's no accountability for mismanagement, and when corruption goes unchecked. And I'm running for controller to help our city rise to all of those challenges. The tools of the office, managing the pension funds responsibly, auditing our agencies to make them work better, managing our budget more effectively can help us rise to our city's biggest challenges. And I look forward tonight to talking about just how we can do that.
Thank you so much. All right, next up, Senator Brian Benjamin. Over to you, Senator.
Thank you so much, Nick, Mindy, Paul, Sylvia, and the entire group of great Democrats in Midtown for inviting me and inviting our colleagues for this important conversation. My name is Senator Brian Benjamin. I am the son of immigrant parents. Both of my parents are presently retired on a pension. I went to Brown and Harvard Business School, where I majored in financial management. Before becoming a senator, I served on my community board for over 6 years, where I rose to become chair and fought for many issues around sort of pushing back on gentrification, making sure that we have safe, clean streets, and focusing on economic development that worked for everybody in my district. Since being a senator, I've been chair of the Budget and Revenues Committee, where I've been focusing on the issues of how we're going to deal with bringing taxes and fairness and budgetary needs to the state in the middle of a huge crisis. I've really worked hard to make sure that I've led the fight on helping to divest New York State from private prisons, worked closely with the state controller to get that done. And I have been since leading the fight to make sure that banks stop lending to private prisons as well. New York State should not in any way, shape, or form be involved with private prisons. As controller, I think the first order of business is to make sure that you protect the pension fund. There are 700,000+ retirees who depend on those pensions, including people like my parents. And you need to make sure that you maximize the returns for those pensioners. I'm the only candidate running who has an experience in investment management. And given that it's a $225+ billion pension fund that the city has to backstop if the returns aren't good, I think we need someone who has that experience. There are a couple other things that I think we need to do, because the controller can hold the mayor accountable with a couple of key tools. Number one, there's a staff of over 700 people and over $70 million budget. I think the controller, and in my view, needs to use the weight of that to help reimagine policing in this city, public safety, reimagine education and housing. I would create assistant controllers for those three areas to focus on not just the problems, but also focus on the solutions. I also believe that we should look at the power to audit. We have to audit the New York Police Department's budget, $6 billion. And, I know the city council has, talked about whether to fund the police or to not. But the real question that I have is, where is the $6 billion? Where is it going? Some of that money is still probably tied to 9/11 thoughts. We've got to really unwind that and make sure that the public has a clear understanding of where the money is. Also, the power to make settlements. I just introduced some legislation that will require the city controller to provide to the public information on where the settlements for some of these police claims. Over $300 million taxpayers have put towards these settlements, miscarriages of justice, and we don't know the details. We need to do that. And lastly, I would just say that the controller also registers contracts. We need to make sure not just that corruption is taken into consideration, but also what is the diversity practices of some companies that we do business with, and how are they focusing on making sure that they are helping to provide a safer and cleaner planet. Those are the kinds of things I'd like to do as a controller. And lastly, I think that the controller should make sure that we invest in building permanent supportive housing so we get out of this temporary shelter system that is way too expensive and doesn't make sense for the city of New York. Thank you.
Great, time. 7 seconds.
All right, thank you so much, Senator. Next up, Assembly Member David Weprin. Assembly Member, over to you. So you might get a pop-up on your screen that says unmute. You might have to hit that for me.
I thought I wasn't allowed to unmute myself, but that's what it said earlier. But good evening. I'm running to be our next New York City Controller to put the needs of working and middle-class families front and center. That includes protecting seniors and those who rely or will soon be relying on pensions. People like my mother, a Cuban immigrant to this country, who became a teacher and a proud UFT member and taught in our public schools. It includes standing up for those struggling to make ends meet during this health crisis. And it includes getting our city through the fiscal crisis with a nearly $4 billion budget deficit ahead of us for next year. I'm the only candidate with the experience needed to do that. I've balanced city budgets before, and I've always made sure they were never balanced on the backs of hardworking New Yorkers. I chaired the New York City Council Finance Committee for 8 years, and we did that. As our controller, we will get our city back on track. But also, I emphasize you've had some of the most progressive legislation in New York State, and I want to talk about some of the progressive things I've done as a city council member and chair of the Finance Committee for 8 years, and now as an assemblyman for 11 years. I chair the Corrections Committee in the Assembly, and we've done some of the most progressive criminal justice reform legislation under my leadership. I've been very active in ending solitary confinement in New York State. We actually shepherded it out of my committee and it passed in the Assembly. Unfortunately, it did not pass in the state Senate, and we're going to make that a priority next year. We're also going to bring elder parole to New York State. And I've been working throughout the pandemic to get the governor at the state level and the mayor at the local level to reduce vulnerable incarcerated individuals from state facilities as well as local jails during this pandemic, whether they be older individuals or individuals with underlying conditions. I've also championed the Adoptee Bill of Rights, which I look at as a civil rights piece of legislation because it allows adoptees in New York State access to their original birth certificate for the first time since 1938. That bill was around the legislature for 50 years. And I finally got it passed a year ago, and the governor signed the bill into law. I also championed the religious garb bill in New York, which would end discrimination in all employment, public or private, for wearing religious garb or facial hair for religious reasons. A bill very important to the Sikh community with
1 minute.
here. Very important to the Muslim community, Muslim women with hijabs and other religious freedom. So again, I'm running for controller to help out during this major fiscal crisis. It's going to be the worst fiscal crisis we've ever had in the history of the city of New York. And I believe I'm the only one that has the relevant public finance experience as well as public sector and private sector experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Time.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. And last but not least, Senator Kevin Parker. Senator Parker, over to you.
Good evening. Let me say hello to both the members of the Hell's Kitchen Club, as well as the Chelsea Club, as well as my colleagues in government who are candidates for City Controller. Great to see you guys. We're probably seeing each other far more than we want to, but you know, it's I think the best field. And at least Andrew Yang is not joining the City Controller race, so that's all. I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn. I'm the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee in the Senate, as well as the majority whip in the New York State Senate. And so let me just say, in 1932, in Harlem Hospital, there was a young African-American boy who was born and given up for adoption. That young man kicked around the foster care system for a while, eventually was adopted, and then married his high school sweetheart. His youngest child of 5 was born in Beth Israel Hospital and was raised in Brooklyn, and has an opportunity to serve and give back to the communities that helped raise his family in Brooklyn. And that young man was me. And I've had a chance to go to public schools my whole life at PS 183, Huddy Junior High School, and Midwood High School. I then, after graduating from Penn State, spent my time here in New York working for people like Ruth Messenger, worked for Mario Cuomo when he was the governor, worked for Carl McCall as the state controller, worked on Wall Street at Payne Webber, and then got elected 18 years ago to the New York State Senate. And in that time, I've not only have kind of distinguished myself in the field of clean energy, but also finance, having served for 18 years on the Senate Finance Committee and over 10 years on the Banking and Insurance Committees. And I really want to take that experience. I want to take my understanding of what this city needs and bring it forward as we look towards this pandemic and what has done not just to the health and the welfare of our great citizenry, but also to our economy. This job of being city controller is going to be about both saving lives and saving livelihoods. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to tax our way out of it. What we're going to need to do is create jobs. And we're going to create full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits. And so we have an economy that's moved from Wall Street to Main Street. And we really need to just make sure that those Main Street businesses get both the access to capital and the technical assistance that they need. And that's the kind of work that the Controller's Office should be doing. I'm going to, day one, set up a council of folks, of business leaders, community leaders, clergy leaders, labor leaders, to talk about and help mark and map our course towards prosperity. It's something that I know that we can do as New Yorkers because we've done it before. This is not the first time we find ourselves in dire straits, and we'll use the same kind of togetherness,
1 minute,
true grit that we use in other times to bring our great city to where it needs to be. And so I'm looking forward to working with all of you as we build an economic base, as we, in fact, make sure that we invest in our young people around the city of New York, but then also make sure that we take care of all of those who've been taking care of us, and that's our pensioners. Job one with the pension is to make sure that we make money. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. But we can do that and simultaneously have a fiscally responsible investment policy. And that's what you'll get under my leadership. And so I look forward to working with you all. I'm looking forward to a great and lively conversation about your ideas and how we, in fact, can help our great city. Thank you so much.
Time, thank you.
Fantastic. So now I'm going to remind everybody, if you have questions for the candidates, please post them on that form. I just put the link in the chat, my.hkdems.org/questions. I'm going to unmute all of the candidates now, and I'm going to hand over to District Leader Paul Devlin, who's going to moderate the conversation for us. And one final thing, on Zoom, in the top right corner of the screen, you'll see a button called View. If you click Speaker View, then the view will automatically shift to the person speaking. So if you want to switch and watch the candidates as they speak, that's a nice little trick for you. So that's all for me. Over to you, Paul.
Great, thank you, Nick. And thank you everybody for being here. What I'd like to do for the next 45 minutes is break the sections up into 3 15-minute conversations. One regarding management of the pension funds, the other two tackling our fiscal crisis, as David points out. How are we going to tackle budget cuts or expense reductions, and then how are we going to talk about some revenue enhancements. So the first round of questions, I'll ask you a generalized question and ask you to answer, and you'll have 2 minutes. And then after each of you gives your 2-minute answer, I'll go to some member questions for 1-minute follow-ups to those until we hit the 15-minute mark for each section. And then we'll go to the subsequent section. So to begin with the pension funds, 2 of you mentioned that you have parents who are retirees of the city. And in my opinion, one of the most important roles of the comptroller is the management of those pension funds. And for those of you in the audience that aren't familiar with the pension funds, there are 5 funds that provide retirement payments to public employees, teachers, and uniformed personnel based on the return on the investments. And in order to meet our obligations to the retirees, any investment shortfalls on the pension funds result in the city having to make up any differences to meet those payments to honor our retirees. And this takes up about 15% of our overall city budget. So the mismanagement of the pension funds would result in either breaking promises to retirees or crowding out other city priorities in order to fund it. So it's a very critical role for the comptroller. And given that we are facing a global investment question and return on investments are diminishing, I want to ask the question to the candidates. And on this round, I'm going to start with David. I'd like to have you talk a little bit for 2 minutes about what the specific actions you would take to guarantee the success of the investments of these pension funds. And you can talk about asset allocation, you can changes to current investment strategies, however you see a way to make sure that we guarantee success of our investments. So David, 2 minutes.
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Paul, and very important function of the controller. You're not the sole trustee, as the state controller, Tom DiNapoli, is, but you do have a major decision making power in the dealing with the 5 pension funds. Of course, they all have boards, and you have to work on a regular basis with the boards. You have to outreach to labor unions who are involved with the boards as well, and that's important. Number 1 priority has to be your fiduciary obligation to make safe and sound investments, and I will certainly do that. And I've had extensive experience at major Wall Street firms, and will certainly bring in as many fiscal experts as possible to help in that. But the key is diversification. You should not be over leveraged in any one particular area. Equities are always important in any portfolio, but you also need investment in bonds. You need investments in real estate. You have to diversify your investments, and that should change. You shouldn't be locked in permanently to any one percentage allocation. It can change from year to year. And I think it's important to have a diversified portfolio, but number 1 should be the return on assets.
Great.
30 seconds, good.
So Brad, what are your thoughts on overall management of the pension fund, please?
So I guess just to build on what David said, obviously you start from building a diverse portfolio. You want to take the long-term view. I think sometimes in a crisis, you could get tempted to sort of think, oh my God, I've got to make, a lot of changes now. You're trying to build long-term, retirement security. So you want long-term investments. That means, not allowing pension companies to do stock buybacks. I think there's some room to do increased investments in infrastructure. There's a range of infrastructure projects that are good investments that are revenue generating. And I think we'll talk about this a little more. Maybe you're going to ask about this in a separate question, but I think how you balance the responsibility as a fiduciary for long-term growth in the funds with the desire to do responsible investing with environmental, social, and governance investing. I think what we need to do is stop having that be so reactive. Activists come with like, we want to change this one thing, and do a strategic plan for responsible investing so you can fuse your priorities for that good diversified long-term portfolio with a strategic approach to investing for values. I've got some more thoughts on how we do that I'm happy to elaborate on later.
Very good, thanks. Kevin, let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would do is I would hire David Wepper and Brian Benjamin and Brad Lander as advisors. So they're going to need jobs. So I'm going to, want to help the, the employment numbers and simultaneously help the fund. But I agree with my colleagues that obviously, again, as I said, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And looking at the long-term stability of the fund is going to be critical. Again, like my other two colleagues, I think diversification is absolutely critical. But I also think that we have to also invest in New York City. And I think there's kind of three big things that I think are important. One is the clean energy economy, both because I think that it's the kind of a trend that we're seeing nationally and internationally, but also it's where we're going to produce full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits for people in our communities. Second, small businesses. We need to invest in funds that invest in small businesses in our communities, right? Because ultimately, we're going to need to be investing in ourselves and making sure that we're not just sending money out just to make money, but that money has to invest in a way that helps build the communities in which we live. And then thirdly, is that we need to also look at diversity in the context of the people who are investing the money. Less than 2% of the people who invest the money in our portfolios are Black, Latino, Asian, and women. And that certainly needs to change. And that's certainly
30 seconds.
I would pay attention to. But I think that ultimately, making money and then doing it in a collaborative way with the labor unions and the other trustees, making those decisions are going to be absolutely critical.
Thank you.
Perfect. Brian?
Sure, thanks for the question. I think the first piece of that is, who do you hire as your chief investment officer? I am a trustee at Brown University, and on our investment committee, we were fortunate that a Brown alum who had done very well in the private sector decided that he wanted to take a very low wage to be the head of investments at Brown University for a $4 billion pension, $4 billion endowment, and has really brought incredible returns year over year. Over the last 5 years, Brown has done better than any other IB in the system, and part of that has been because he has a philosophy, understands the markets, and has hired the right people underneath him to help make sure that the university's been able to get outsized returns. And part of that has been, having an emphasis on trying to find some of the best investments out there, and some of that has been relationship based. So one of the issues that we have in New York City is that we're not paying competitive rates to the private sector, and we never will, right? That's just not something that we're going to do. So you have to look to find, talented people who might be on the tail end of their careers, who've done very well and want to give back, and or people who are on the rise. And this is a good opportunity for them to really show their stuff. But quite frankly, the controller has to have a Bureau of Asset Management and a CIO who really can decide whether you're
30 seconds.
Whether you're focusing on this investment strategy or that investment strategy, particularly since the world is in chaos coming out of the markets. The stock market has done well, but Main Street has not done well. Trying to reconcile that, you need a really talented team to do that. And that has to be the first order of business to figure that out.
Great. That actually does lead to one of the questions that came from one of the members. And we'll go through, in this section, we'll stay in that same order. We'll go David, Brad, Kevin, Brian on each question. What are your thoughts on And two of you mentioned hiring the staff you would use for your investment management. What are your thoughts on consolidation of asset managers amongst the 5 funds? Right now, each of the 5 funds has different asset managers. Do you see consolidation of asset managers as a benefit or a negative?
Well, I think, I don't think, you should be locked into, to one investment manager. Certainly, it should be an ongoing process, but we should bring the best and the brightest as asset managers. There can be one chief investment officer as there is now, but I think it's important to bring in many other asset managers and obviously work with the 5 pension boards, because there are a board for each pension fund, and it's important to get a consensus. But we should get the best and the brightest, and get as many smart, wise investment managers as possible.
Right. Thank you. So, Brad.
First, I'll start with some straight talk. I mean, I think you would definitely be able to save money and by having one central asset manager. But the unions care a lot about their members, and so their trustees are not going to allow that. Like each of the 5 boards, you can't pass a resolution unless you have the support of the trustees, of the people whose money it is. And they've made really clear they care about having their money, and therefore having their consultants in the ways that they are currently. Now, sometimes that allows different things to happen. So 3 of the 5 funds have decided to divest from fossil fuels because they don't think oil and coal and gas are good long-term investments. The teachers, the other Board of Education workers, and the broad DC 37 retirement NICERs voted that way. Cops and firefighters didn't. They were able to make those different choices. I agree with those 3 that did, but I respect that, the money belongs to the retirees here. And that's the way that you have to approach it. Just one other example is that the teachers were first to get out of hedge funds, which I think they saw both not as good stewardship of their long-term fiscal interests, but also as big investors, in that case, in charter schools. So there's some gains as a result of having folks have their own consultants. It comes at you have to pay more to hire the additional investment advisors, but realistically, that's the structure that the folks whose money it is has chosen, and it's the job of the
30 seconds
fiduciary to do the best you can to help them achieve their goals.
Great. Kevin?
I think having a diversity of asset managers is actually a strength of the system. And I think obviously you wanted to be able to have some flexibility. You want to be able to have some diversity of thought. And there are 5 different boards. You do have to deal with those boards separately. And so I think that having, again, a diversity of views and a diversity of options is absolutely a strength. And I certainly would not change that and continue to work to make that system even stronger.
Right. Brian?
Sure. I think that, I've talked to a number of the different trustees on different boards, and the philosophies and ideologies are different. And so one of the things I think could be a way to do consolidation is look at talking with them about maybe having one or less investment advisors, or at least one who is providing each of the separate boards with sort of thoughts that make sense given their values and what they want to put forward. I do agree with my colleagues that the idea that you could just consolidate the 5 funds without their approval is foolhardy. But there are some things that you can do that they can share that can help reduce costs, besides the main issue of them wanting to determine their own investments. But I think an investment advisor can represent and provide different ideas to different funds that can help save costs across the board.
Great. All right. So as a follow-up to this, I think, Brad, you mentioned some of the funds have divested of fossil fuels, and a couple of the members have now put into the chat box that they're concerned about investments in fossil fuels and maybe rather have investments in green energy. And given that the 5 funds have different asset managers, and you're all saying you would allow them the opportunity to manage their own funds, would you see a way that the comptroller could set a universal position on some sort of investment such that divestiture from fossil fuels could be possible for all city funds? And so we'll go around with that. David, let's start with you.
Look, there's ways to have sound fiduciary investments and still achieve positive public policy. So I also think there's a lot we could do in the fossil fuel area. But again, we have to be selective in investing in companies that not only give sound return, but also do good public policy. So I don't think there's necessarily an inconsistency.
30 seconds.
I think you can divest from fossil fuels at the same time by investing in alternative companies that are better for the environment. So you should look at not only fossil fuels, but there's so many other areas. But again, the primary responsibility should be the fiduciary obligation to get the best return on your assets.
Okay, so Brad, you've already said, oh, Brad's muted. Nick, can you unmute Brad? Nick or Brad? Oh, there we go.
Thank you. I apologize.
So Brad, you did mention that you're the one who kind of led me into this, that some funds are, some funds aren't. I'm asking if you can consolidate so all funds are.
Well, look, let me start by saying the Comptroller is the office assigned with taking the long-term view on the city. And boy, if you're thinking about what the long-term risks are, the climate crisis is so much the largest one. We didn't see the COVID crisis coming, and we've paid for that failure to prepare and lost lives. We know the climate crisis will be far worse. So it really is on us now to mitigate and prepare. And the 8 years that the next controller will serve are going to be the critical one. So we've got a fire burning and we've got to get moving. So
30 seconds.
I want to do the work to try to persuade the police and firefighters that it's a bad financial risk to be in oil and coal and gas, and do everything I can to persuade them to get out of it. I do think there's a much broader array of things we can do by investing in clean energy and renewables, by taking shareholder action to get the companies that are the broad corpus of the funds to do more to reduce their fossil fuel use. If you go to landerfornyc.com/climate, I've got a really ambitious climate plan that goes into a lot more detail on all of that.
Okay, you win the prize for first one to launch your website address. Thank you. Kevin?
It's a drinking game.
So look, I think that it's interesting to start talking about a policy to do it. But again, you're talking about 5 different boards, and again, you're not a sole trustee, right? And so you have to work with those boards to make decisions. So coming out with one policy direction is not really the way to actually make it happen. The second thing that's complicated about this is that it's not as straightforward as companies with dirty fuel and companies with clean fuel, right? So one of in the state of New York, again, being the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, funny enough, the most sustainable, the company with the most sustainable assets is National Grid, which also has a lot of dirty or fossil fuels as well. And so are you going to totally divest from National Grid? Probably not. And so we have to look at the notion of net zero versus absolute zero when we're dealing with these issues and help these companies move along. And so again, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so we still need to have something that we need to have pension funds that are both fiscally responsible and socially responsible simultaneously. But I think it's going to be a process, and I don't think it's going to be as easy or zero sum as just make a policy and then everything will come along. There's going to be work that needs to be done. And I expect to be the leader that helps these boards and works with these different organizations and the corporations to, in fact, get to a place where we have a 5 pension funds that are both fiscally strong and socially responsible.
Great, thanks so much. Brian, you're going to wrap us up here.
Sure, thanks. I think it's important to note that the existing controller, Scott Stringer, is working on a report to provide sort of a direction and a path for divestment from fossil fuels. That's a project that's underway right now, and it's my intention. And by the way, it is his position that we should be divesting from fossil fuels, and he's committed to doing that, as is the mayor. So for me, I think what will be important for me to do is to see that report, read that report, get a sense of where they believe what the next steps are. Is it very clear from a detailed standpoint of how we get from here to there? and then work to implement that. But I think part of the job of the next controller is going to have to be a salesperson for the report, because as was mentioned by some of my colleagues, fire and police have a different philosophy, and we need to figure out how to get them on board in order to make this make sense. And I think part of their issue is they're concerned about the returns issue. So we have to pitch it and sell it from a perspective of divestment from fossil fuels actually would be better for the bottom line of their funds.
Perfect. All right. I hope everybody else felt like that was a fast 15 minutes. So we're now going to move on to our next category. And we're going to talk a little bit about, as we face this fiscal crisis, right? How do we manage our budget cuts? How do we manage our expenses in such a way? And what role can the comptroller play in that? And I think after pension funds, which I think is most important, there are ways the comptroller can directly impact expenses. Specifically, that you're responsible for reviewing and making recommendations on city contracts. So can you, and on this round, I'm going to start with Kevin. So can you provide us examples of ways that you will exercise your power as comptroller to reduce expenses as part of your contract review process?
Absolutely. I think one of the areas that we should be absolutely looking at is economic development and how we spend economic development dollars. I think it's a big expense, and we don't necessarily always get the bang for the buck. And more importantly, we don't necessarily always get the jobs that we're promised. And I think that that's going to be an important part of what we need to look at and how we're investing in companies. And we need to, I think, have a policy where instead of investing in companies, we're investing in people and making sure that we have as much opportunity to do that as possible. Auditing the NYPD, I think, is going to be an important part of what we do. I've been a leader in Albany on police reform. The state legislature in New York was the first legislature in the country to pass a comprehensive set of police reforms. We passed 10 bills, 4 of them were mine. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done there. And I think we can both find both management savings, but also cost savings that we can use to fund good ideas, like a bill I have that produces a non-police response to mental health and homeless calls. I think that would be a critical thing to do that would both save lives and save money. And I think that that's kind of the direction that we need to be focusing on.
Terrific. Brian, you're going second in this round.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things I do on day one is I want to appoint 3 assistant controllers, 1 for public safety, 1 for education, 1 for housing. Besides the fact that we need to do that for reimagining purposes, and we need to be clear about the kind of city we need to live in, there's also a lot of economic issues tied to that. I agree that there is significant money to be saved in the police budget. I think we need to first audit it and figure out where all the money is and cut out waste that is inappropriate, and or move resources to better places that provide better productivity for the city. On the housing front, it continues to boggle my mind that we can spend $6,400 a month to house a homeless family in a temporary shelter, $3,000 plus for an individual, when we could be providing permanent supportive housing, and the controller could play a major role in that. I think there are major cost savings in that. And then on the education side, we can talk for 3 days about how we can look at cost savings in education across the board. I don't think we have enough time to talk about it, and given you only give me a minute, but I think there is significant opportunities there that the consultants that the DOE has, every time there's a new issue, there's a new consultant. And it just seems to me that we should really be auditing and looking at the use of consultants in the DOE and figuring out how to root that out to save money.
Great, thanks. David, you're going third in this round. So what are your thoughts on cutting some expenses?
Yeah, well, I've actually balanced 8 budgets as chair of the City Council Finance Committee, and we had huge deficits coming in to city government right after 9/11. That's why over 10 of my colleagues in the Assembly have endorsed me, including one of your Assembly members, Dick Godfrey, who actually is the senior member of both houses of the legislature and has been a progressive leader for 50 years in the legislature. I've also got the endorsement of Rebecca Seawright, another Assembly member from Manhattan, and Maritza Davila, who's head of the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force, a leader in the Latino community. So I've turned budget deficits into surpluses, going through a number of recessions in my 8 years in the city council as finance chair. First, the post 9/11 multi-billion-dollar deficit. Then we had the 2008 recession. And in between, we had major surpluses. So it's very important to root out waste, and the audit function can do that. I think the outside consulting budget, not only of the education department, but many departments is out of hand. And that's a place we can cut waste right away and have significant budget savings by eliminating a lot of these outside consultants and using existing employees.
Great, thank you, David. Brad, your thoughts on some expense controls?
Thanks, Paul. Two areas I want to talk about. First are the city's capital projects. You know, we spend $10 billion every year contracting for much needed capital projects, and we need them. You know, that's where we build schools and repave our roads and invest in our subways and build affordable housing and build that resilient climate infrastructure we're going to need for rising seas and rising temperatures. But I think everybody knows that over half of the city's capital projects, I put out a report about this, are over budget and behind schedule. Some of them quite over budget and behind schedule. Right now, we don't even know, there's not a universal tracking system for capital projects. I passed a bill in February that will require the city to establish one. So then the controller's office in the future can look at all of those contracts across many different capital agencies, because the school construction authorities over here and DDC's over here. And, you've got multiple different agencies. So we've got that bill passed. We're going to be getting the tracker. I'm going to have a team specifically focused on capital projects auditing. I think it's a place of just enormous savings that few people have gone to look, and where there's really significant opportunities to get projects built on time and to meaningfully reduce cost. There's some good examples around the world from where people, it's a hard thing to do, but where people have really achieved better results. That saves money, it gets projects done, but it also is about job creation and building the infrastructure we need as a platform for future economic growth in the city. One other area I'll mention real quickly, Brian mentioned one of the largest areas of payouts of claims, which is for police misconduct. And he's right that we should do more to get on the front end of that, use the new tools of 50A to make sure that we're reducing police misconduct to save lives and money. The second biggest area are traffic crashes caused by city drivers. And actually, we know how to reduce them. DOT has reduced the number of crashes by its drivers, but the next 4 largest agencies that cause crashes are paying out hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of traffic crashes that we're liable for. I'd make sure there was a program in place to reduce those settlements.
Great, thank you, Brad. That actually leads to one of the members' questions. Sorry, I'm also running timers here at the same time. Sorry, and that leads to one of the questions. And on this next few questions rounds, we'll have 1 minute each. And Brad, you just talked about crashes, and one of the questions is the vehicular crashes cost the city $9 billion annually to the city. And so, what sort of implementation and monitoring would you do of the Vision Zero milestones? So again, let's start with Kevin on that. So Vision Zero milestones monitoring, please.
No, absolutely. It's one of the areas that, again, I'm proud to have been one of the people in Albany who actually voted for Vision Zero, and glad to see that it's been implemented. Brad and I share a district, and we know we've had one of the most serious fatalities and really heartbreaking, accidents that the city has seen. And so it's one of the areas in which, we should audit as a management function to see where there is opportunity for growth in the program, and see where's working, where it's not, and adjust the program in a way to both make the city more safer, but then also to get cost savings out of the program.
Good. Brian?
Sure. I think one of the things that people respond to is if they can lose their contract, they tend to behave a little better. And one of the things that I think we should look at is contracts with any entities that are places where we're seeing some of these crashes, some of these concerns on on the Vision Zero front that we can look to possibly say, look, you might not get your contract renewed if you're part of the issue. And I think, and then I also would agree with Kevin on the audit function, broadly defined as it relates to sort of making sure that we're keeping track on Vision Zero, the deadlines and goals.
Brian, I'm going to put you on the spot as a follow-up. You just mentioned specific contracts. Can you name one?
Actually, the bus drivers, right? So I would look at sort of.
Okay, that's good. That you're over your time. That was excellent. Good answer.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah.
No, that was good. All right, David.
Yeah, I think the audit function can play an important role, and we should be hiring more auditors. Certainly, a lot of the accidents, could be discovered faults in the certain things that DOT is doing and other agencies that are doing in the traffic enforcement. I also supported Vision Zero. I voted for it as well, and I think there's a lot more can be done with the audit function. It may require additional auditors to cover a lot of these areas.
30
but
seconds.
I certainly think a lot can be done to reduce settlements and lawsuits against the city by starting on the front end by improving public safety.
Great. Brad, your thought on Vision Zero funding?
Earlier this year, I passed a bill called the Reckless Driver Accountability Act. It was inspired by a crash in my district that killed a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And it turned out the driver who killed them had run so many red lights and had so many speed camera violations that she was in the top 1% of reckless drivers in the city. So we had the information to know that she needed to change her driving behavior or stop driving before she killed Abigail and Joshua. And that inspired me to realize, in addition to the good work we've done on life-saving infrastructure, which I totally support through Vision Zero, we need a new approach to reckless driving. We can use the data from the speed cameras and the red light cameras to identify the top 1% of reckless drivers and say to them, you have to take a reckless driving course. You have to change your driving behavior, or you can't keep your license and your car because you can't use it like a weapon aimed at your neighbors. We've done good work on infrastructure, but the data shows we really need to focus on reckless drivers and reckless driving behaviors. I've worked with set up a program at the Red Hook Community Justice Center that's had really good impacts here. And I want to see that program expanded citywide. I think it could save hundreds of lives and prevent thousands of injuries a year. That plan is on the website as well. I won't give you the URL so that you don't have time. But we worked really closely with a range of folks in traffic safety to think about how we could really save lives in that area.
Terrific, thank you. And I know I'm getting note from my transportation activists. There's a distinction between crash and accident. So let's I'll figure out that nuanced difference. As a follow-up to that, and in terms of the contracts, one of the questions from a member is, would you consider reductions in the government's fleet of vehicles, and notably SUVs? Kevin.
Well, I think that the main thing that we need to do, so the short answer is yes. The long answer is that the bigger issue, I think, is not reduction, but also is fuel change, right? And so as one of the people who helped negotiate the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership Protection Act, it is one of the things that we're going to need to do really over the next 30 years is replace every single car. And so that's going to, I think, have a significant economic impact on the way that we operate, but it's also, there's some savings.
30 seconds.
There's some savings in that transformation as well. And so that's one of the areas that I would pay a lot of attention to is the transformation of the fleet in addition to the reduction.
Great, thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Kevin said, and I think so the answer is yes, but I would also want to look at it from a cost perspective. What size of fleet do we need, and I think reduction is a good idea, broadly defined. So I won't add more to what Kevin said, because I agree with a number of things he mentioned.
Terrific. David?
Yes, I think there can be a lot of changes. I think we should have more fuel efficient vehicles. I don't think everybody working for the city at whatever level should be having cars. I think we can reduce that. We can save a lot of money by reducing the fleets and certainly having more fuel efficient vehicles rather than these SUV gas guzzlers.
Great. Okay. And Brad?
Yes, absolutely. That traffic safety plan I mentioned on my website commits me to audit and reduce the city's vehicle fleet. And you just see this in so many areas. Let's start with policing. It's mostly a pedestrian city. The things we want folks out there paying attention to are on foot. So the fact that the vast majority of our officers are driving around in cars is bad public safety, bad environmental policy, bad fiscal policy, and actually leads to unnecessary crashes.
Great, thank you. And that, Brad, wraps up the section on expense review. So let's now talk about some revenue enhancement programs. And again, this round, we'll have one leading question that you'll each have 2 minutes to respond to, and then I'll turn to member questions for 1 minute follow-ups. And so what actions would you take? Oh, I'm sorry, on this segment, we'll start with Brad, all right? So Brad, you can start thinking. What actions would you take to see increases in city revenues, or what proposed revenue streams that you know are upcoming would you work to support?
Well, let's start, at the top, because although the city is limited in what it can do to get more revenue, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but like what I'm doing right now to help the city is tomorrow night I'm sponsoring a phone bank into Georgia, and I'm doing it again next week. Like the number one thing, I know you guys are doing that too, and that's not just good democracy policy, it is good fiscal policy, because the federal government owes us COVID relief, they owe us stimulus, they owe us the money for the MTA. We send so much more money to Washington than we get back. We need a federal government that will take care of cities and states, red as well as blue. So like that's number one. We've got to get a federal government that will invest in all cities and states, including this one. Then I do hope my colleagues in state government will take up progressive revenue increases, which they can do in Albany, but we can't do in New York City. That's closing the carried interest loophole, that's, putting a tax on, ultra millionaire wealth, that's looking at a range of other smart revenue strategies. And I think we all have our favorites, so you'll hear from the others as well. I won't try to tick them all up. I'll leave them out there. Look at this for the city. The city's biggest tax is the property tax, and right now the property tax is both inequitable and just a mess. It is unfair in who it hits, and it's also sort of random. It's just gotten it's like barnacles. There was a commission that the mayor and the council put together that proposes a thoughtful set of changes to
30 seconds
tax that now we need Albany to act on. And no one at the moment wants to raise property taxes. Let me be very clear. This is not the moment to raise property taxes. However, it is the moment to reform property taxes so it can be the right tax in New York City in the years ahead. So while I think we need new federal revenues, new state progressive revenues, at the city level, what we need to do is reform the property tax structure so it is fair for the years ahead.
Great, thank you. In this round, Kevin, you're going to go 2 minutes on revenue suggestions.
Absolutely. First of all, having been on the finance committee of the state Senate, I've been through a lot of fiscal woes, again, having taken office in 2002, right after 9/11. And not getting any money from the feds. We wound up with a $12 billion deficit that I had to help close. In 2009 and 2010, the state legislature and me as a member of the finance committee closed two $10 billion deficits and trying to figure it out. So this is kind of an exercise that I've been through before. And so I'm looking forward to bringing that experience to the city controller's office. And there's a lot of things we should be doing. I've been a champion for progressive taxation, like millionaire's tax, which we've, again, on the state level have voted for and I've supported. Stock transfer tax, which is one of my favorite that I've continued to be a champion on. But let me be very clear. Long-term, we are not going to tax our way out of this problem. We're going to need to build our way out of this problem. New Yorkers don't want to hand out. They want to hand up. Yes, we need money from the feds and we deserve money from the feds. And the right point was made, which is that we are owed money from the federal government. We give far more in taxes than we get back. But, and the state needs to do its job in terms of progressive taxation. But what we need to be doing here on the city level is putting people back to work. And we need to be providing, we have an economy that's moving from Wall Street to Main Street, and we need to be providing both technical assistance and access
30 seconds
to small businesses, not because I care about petty bourgeois capitalism, but we need to create full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits, and it's the small businesses that do that. In my community, that has been Flatbush Avenue and Notion Avenue and Ralph Avenue, and we need to make sure that we support those businesses around the state, because only by giving people jobs are they going to bring the tax revenue back into the city that we need and make our communities sustainable. And that's the way that I would address this.
Great, thank you. David?
Yes, there's no question we need additional revenue. And we have more billionaires in New York City than anywhere else in the country per capita. And there's no question we can have billionaires and high-end millionaires tax, because after all, they've been around and benefited from the city, and it's time that they paid a fair share, a little bit more. I think also now is the time. It's a very unique time in our history, the fact that we have the worst fiscal crisis since the Great Recession, worse than any other fiscal crisis we've had. Now I think we should revisit what used to be called the commuter tax or the non-resident income tax. No one else is talking about that except myself, in my opinion, but there's no question that people that live outside the city but work in the city, spend their day in the city, benefit from city services, whether it be transportation, sanitation, fire, police, they should be paying their fair share. And now is the time to bring back the non-resident income tax.
Great. Brian?
Sure, thank you. In the Senate, I presently chair the budget. Can I start over? Okay. Yeah, in the Senate, I chair the Budget and Revenues Committee, which is charged with this very task, which is to provide solutions to the Senate as it relates to the best decisions we can make as it relates to raising revenue. We've been meeting for months, and we have been looking at a number of different options. I think a couple really come to mind given the scale of the problem, right? I mean, in the state, we're looking at a $14 billion revenue shortfall this year, $16 billion next year. I know the city's looking at a $4 billion shortfall. The MTA is another $16 billion. So we've got significant numbers, and I think we have to have real tax options that can help bridge that gap. One is the millionaires tax, which was mentioned earlier. There's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't aggressively raise the rates to help bring a significant revenue to the state. I think secondly, a mark-to-market tax. One of the things that we have noticed in this pandemic that billionaires like Jeff Bezos and others have made significant wealth that should be treated as income. There's some mechanics that we have to work out on that, but we should really be trying to figure out how to tax some of that wealth, because if billionaires are making money during the pandemic while others are suffering, we should get some of that revenue. And also we should raise the corporate franchise tax. We had lowered the corporate franchise tax in 2014. And I think it's time for us to raise that back and then look at other ways to do that. We've also talked about, and we're planning to do, doubling the LLC and the LLP filing taxes. There's a number of fees that we can look at, but I think those really can get us a lot of the way there to deal with some of the issues that we have.
Ryan, those are really such great ideas. We really need you as the chair of the Revenue Committee in the state Senate to keep bringing it all home.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm committed to that.
We are working on it. Thank you. Thank you, Brad, for that encouragement. I really appreciate it.
I apologize, Mr. Chair, for violating the rules of the debate. I hope
that's okay.
That's all right. You took advantage of the fact that the ambulance was going by. I muted myself, and then Nick didn't let me unmute. I got to have a little free fall there.
Oh my gosh! And I wonder what's going on.
Yeah. So so taxes is clearly something that all of us have just talked about. I'd like to come back to a more nuanced discussion on the property tax and what specifics you think you could do to reform the property taxes. But before I do that, I'm going to go through a round robin of yes or no, because all of you mentioned different taxes. So I just want to hear for apple to apple for all of our audience. I want to know if you are in, and I'm going to answer, I'm going to name the tax. You're going to say yes or no when I call your name. So pied-à-terre tax, Brad.
Yes.
Kevin.
No.
David.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
Okay. Stock transfer tax, Brad.
Need to see more research to make sure they're not going to move out.
Okay, that's
move their
enough.
servers to
Kevin. Kevin.
Yes.
David.
No.
Brian.
No.
Okay, commuter tax, Brad.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
Wow, commuter tax is the only one you all agree on. Very good. So let's go into property tax for a second. Brad, we're going to start with you because you raised it as a way to talk about the system of the city property tax review and the board that did come out with some suggestions. And they had a number of suggestions. So, in your 1 minute answer to this question, what are some of the specifics that you would do to reform the property tax, and what examples do you have?
Yeah. So the example is that I'm sitting right here in an undertaxed house. You know, it's that simple. Park Slope. It's for like a reason that you can understand, which is that they wanted there to be a restraint on how much anybody's taxes could go up each year. And so they restrained how much the taxes could go up. But in places like my neighborhood, where the property values have gone up dramatically, our houses are significantly undertaxed. And that means we're paying less. And folks in, you know, Brighton Beach and, you know, Baychester are paying
30
more
seconds.
as a result. And that's not right. And so we have to have a process. Now you have to do it thoughtfully because you have seniors in homes and they don't have the income to pay. So you either have to do it, you know, on sale, or there's a few other ways that you could transition it in. But we have to change that. It's not right that some of the neighborhoods like mine that have the highest property values are so undertaxed, and it's our responsibility to change it. That's why I support it, even though it is not in the interests of my constituents. And I hope that Albany will take up the plan we submitted.
Thank you. All right, Kevin.
I think that one of the things we have to significantly change is the assessment and the way the assessments happen. That the whole system just is nonsensical, and we have to fix that. And I think that's going to take us a long way in terms of making a fairer and more progressive property tax system.
Great, thank you. David?
Yeah, there's no question there's reform that should be done in the property tax. I represent a number of co-op owners in Queens, and it's really unfair that co-ops, consider them, that's their home. They're not wealthy individuals, they're middle-class people, and they're paying a lot more percentage-wise in property taxes than single-family homeowners. So there's no question that there can be reform. At the same time, we have to protect the most vulnerable, senior citizens, people on fixed income. And I have a bill to postpone any foreclosure sales and tax lien sales for unpaid property taxes and water bills during this pandemic till a year after the pandemic ends.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I think the number one issue, and Kevin was referring to it, is that we have to look at the Class 1 properties that are able to be assessed at potential rent roll as opposed to comparable sales. And I think, we have a situation, and we were talking about the pied-à-terre tax earlier, where there are people who have apartments that are assessed at $300,000, yet the market value is more along the lines of $5 million, right? That's a huge delta. We need to bring that in line. I think
30 seconds.
And I think part of that issue is we also need to look at how there is a property tax cap that communities like mine, also Brad's, where people who bought their properties a long time ago, their property taxes only go up a certain amount, and their property taxes are lower than where they are in middle class neighborhoods that haven't had that rapid increase in property value. We have to fix that.
Right.
Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. So another source of revenue is borrowing. So I'd like to know what your position is on borrowing to cover budget shortfalls, whether for operating expenses or for capital. So Brad, let's hear your thoughts on borrowing.
So I'm a big believer in long-term borrowing to invest in our future, and we actually have room to do it. Economists don't want the percent of our operating budget that's going for debt service above 15%, but it's only at 12% right now, which is why it was a mistake of Mayor de Blasio to cut the capital budget by about $2.5 billion. That was cuts to infrastructure, road repaving, affordable and supportive housing, economic development, school construction. We don't need to do that. You don't save money in the short term by doing it, and you cost yourself exactly what Keynesian economics teaches you, which is you can create jobs now, get economic stimulus, and the long-term value of those assets. So I led the fight to get it back. He restored $466 million of affordable and supportive housing. I'd like to see us do more of that investment, especially in climate sustainable and resilient infrastructure. I would rather not borrow to cover operating expenses. I think there's a lot we can do to close the loophole.
Great, thank you. Kevin?
Yes, I absolutely believe, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, do you believe, what are your thoughts on borrowing to cover budget shortfalls, either for operating or capital?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that you should be borrowing for long-term capital expenses. I don't believe in borrowing for short-term operating expenses. And certainly think that we could have a better plan on the city level, for doing that. And certainly, just like we saw in the New Deal, we really ought to be looking at opportunities to borrow to invest in infrastructure and invest in jobs and invest in small businesses that we then use to convert those into jobs, right? Because ultimately, we're not just borrowing just to borrow. We should be borrowing with a purpose of rebuilding infrastructure, but not just to rebuild infrastructure, which we need to do, but then also to create full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, David.
Yeah, long-term borrowing for operating expenses is what got New York City into trouble in the 70s, and that created the original fiscal crisis. Obviously, long-term borrowing, capital plans, not for operating expenses, for future projects can be very good, and I think it's important to have. But again, borrowing, should be a last resort to get out of this fiscal crisis. But this is the worst fiscal crisis that the city has ever experienced, and there may be a number of things that have to be done, including potentially borrowing. But again, I would try to make that a last resort, and certainly not try to borrow for operating expenses.
30 seconds.
Unless it's part of an overall package that includes many other things, including high-end taxes, including major cuts in waste. So there's a lot has to be done. In a fiscal crisis, you can't achieve it by one way.
Right, okay. And Brian?
Sure, yeah, I agree with borrowing for long-term capital needs. I don't agree with borrowing for operating expenses unless you have a very easy, digestible, clear plan for how you're going to pay that back with a very sort of logical revenue assumptions over the next couple of years. And so one of the things that's been challenging in this conversation that we've had with the city is that we haven't gotten that last piece. And so as far as I'm concerned, I'm a no until I can see something that gives me comfort that those operating expenses wouldn't compound upon themselves and lead us closer to bankruptcy.
Great. That actually takes us to the 15-minute mark on our third segment. So I want to thank everybody for staying focused on time. Paulette, you did an amazing job, but your job is not done. So as we said at the beginning, everybody, all the candidates will have an opportunity to give a 90-second closing statement.
Right.
And what I'd like to do is have us go in reverse alphabetical order by last name. I had to find a way to mix this up. So David, you get 90 seconds to give us your wrap and tell us why you're the best candidate for this race.
I believe I'm the best candidate for this race because I'm the only one that has both public and private finance experience. My 8 years as chair of the City Council Finance Committee, I also served as deputy superintendent of banking for New York State under Governor Mario Cuomo and secretary of the banking board. And I also have private sector finance experience, having worked at major Wall Street firms in public finance, providing long-term bond issues for building hospitals and schools and major infrastructure projects.
Terrific, thank you. Kevin.
I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I'm running for City Comptroller, and I'd really like to have the endorsement of both your clubs. And I think that leadership matters. And I think that leadership is going to be what's on the ballot during the Democratic primary. And I'm the one who has the experience in leadership, both being the majority whip as well as the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, which means I have the experience of dealing with the clean energy economy and how you build a clean energy economy in a great city like New York City. I'm somebody after 18 years on the Finance Committee, over a decade on the Banking Committee in the Senate, over a decade on the Insurance Committee, having worked for Carl McCall, the State Comptroller, having worked at Payne Weber, a Fortune sturdy company, have the kind of experience, the understanding, and more importantly, the leadership that we're going to need to have bold visions about doing things like auditing the police department, about making sure that we get our bang for the buck out of economic development, making sure our young people are invested in, and more importantly, making sure our pensioners are taken care of. And so
30 seconds.
I'm hoping to have your support, but more importantly, I really want your partnership. And as we go forward through this campaign, to work with you to better my ideas and to reach out to people in our communities and let them know that help is on the way.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Brad.
Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed this forum. You guys have drilled down the best so far on all the real issues of what the Comptroller's office is and gotten us to go for, really articulate plans. Look, we've been in severe crises before as a city, and I think we've seen what not to do and what we want to do. In the 1970s, our fiscal crisis led us to underinvest in our subways and sanitation and parks, and we paid for it. People lost livelihoods, but the city wasn't a platform for growth and opportunity. Out of other crises, from the 1890s to the Great Depression to World War II, we invested in CUNY, in the subways, in public housing, in clean water, and we reaped the benefits in terms of equal and sustainable growth. And it's our time to do that again out of this crisis and before the next one. It really is investing to prevent the climate crisis, reduce emissions, divest from fossil fuels, transition to clean energy, build
30 seconds.
infrastructure that we can create good jobs, a more just city, and create a platform for growth. But we can only do any of that if we make government work better. The agencies have to deliver in addition to having those progressive goals. I know a lot of those are the goals of your two clubs. I'm really honored to have the chance to talk with you. I hope to be able to work alongside you in those critical fights for the years to come. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Brian, wrap us up. Bring us home.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both clubs for putting together an amazing forum. This has been really fantastic. I believe that the job of the next controller is twofold. One is to safeguard the pension and safeguard the city's assets. I believe I'm the only person who has the experience of investment management, which is a big issue given the fact there's a $225 billion pension fund. And if it isn't managed well, the city has to put up more money and is on the hook in order to shore up the fund. But secondly, the controller has to hold the mayor and the city council accountable. And there are a number of tools to do that. I expressed some of those earlier when it comes to the staff and hiring assistant controllers who can help make sure that public safety, education, and housing is really front in mind in how we are reimagining the city of New York. The tools to audit, the tools to settle police misconduct, and enforcing prevailing wage. I mean, these are all important issues. The controller has to be a very active figure. We have to have an active chief financial officer, and I have the skill set to put that together in order to serve the residents of the city of New York. And so I ask you humbly for your endorsement, and hopefully we can move together to make sure the city of New York is safe and that we have accountability and transparency across New York City.
I'm good.
Thank you so much. Good timing. And even though I think it was Brad was the only one who actually threw his website into one of the conversations, we have added all candidate website links into the chat box. So anybody in the audience can go directly to those websites to find out more information. I want to thank the four candidates. It was very informative. You guys were make it a competitive race. I know I'm now still debating, so it's good. I've got more information. I want to take particular note to thank our brothers and sisters at CRDC for joining us tonight, particularly Mindy and Stephen and Sylvia. Thank you for your help in organizing this. Nick, your indomitable force as a leader of this club is terrific, and Paulette, our MVP for timing. I appreciate it. So thank you all very much. I hope to see you all next week, Thursday, December 17th, for our Borough President Candidate Forum. Thank you all and have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you so
Good night.
much.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.